day is going to be Moshe, the lawgiver, and the second sign. I feel that this is very, very important for end-time understanding. It may not be that we understand everything, but just know that there are some things that are going on in the earth. Signs, wars, famine, disease, and all of these different types of things that are taking place. Our people are being slaughtered off in numbers, and the world is actually paying attention to what is going on in the United States and beginning to mobilize and speak out against the police brutality that is happening here in the U.S. The UN, 114 nations, member nations that is, there's 193 member nations of the UN. And with that said, 114 of them have now signed a petition against the United States, saying that their practice, their governing practices are condemned. They are now condemning the United States police, and they're saying it straight out, police brutality. And they even call the names of different ones. These are different countries, and they have paid attention to the different names and the different people. I saw one even earlier that was in South Africa, and they were petitioning not the government itself, but different groups are speaking out. Canada, Europe, different places. But Zimbabwe, what they asked, they said for the United States to get out of Africa because of their treatment of the blacks here in this country. The United States African American culture is being targeted, as well as around the country, and they are lifting their voice in South Africa. Now you know they went through the apartheid, and they're lifting their voice and saying, we will no longer stand idly by and watch it happen. We will now begin to speak out against the atrocities that is happening in the United States and around the world to people of African descent. And so with this spoken, as I said, multiple nations are beginning to speak out and mobilize with protests, so on, and speaking out against the United States. And we're not alone. Let me just say it like that. We're not alone. There's a lot of European people in descent that are now speaking out against the atrocities that are happening here. So we cannot take it lightly that this is something that's just happening. They're saying Black Lives Matter. Right. And everybody else trying to jump on the bandwagon and say all lives matter. Yes, that's true. That means even more black lives should matter. So if we can hold out, I see through these signs that Yahweh, our time is very near to complete. I no longer ask how long, I no longer ask why, because I know why, and I understand how long. Yahweh said 400 years. We haven't made that mark yet, but we're close. We're very close. So as we get ready to go into it, Moshe, the lawgiver, and the second sign. If this is the second sign, what is the first sign? So this is what we're going to look at today and have a closer look as to What is this that we're going through? What we're going through is the first sign. And we'll explain all of that as I go. The first sign and what is the second sign, so that we can kind of understand, if we can get the lights, understand what is taking place in our world today. First thing I want to show, thanks to Rabbi 2, something that he sent in on the Yap, and it is at the Smithsonian exhibit in Washington, D.C. It says, Pillar of Faith, African American and Judaism. And since this is big enough, which is why I really wanted it on camera, because I can get it bigger, I'll read this portion down here. There are African American members of Reform and conservative Jewish congregations around the United States. However, these artifacts come from the commandment keepers, the tradition to which Beth Shalom B'nai Zayin, Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, these items belong. I'll just kind of cut through. That's where these items, what you see in the Smithsonian's, they're very nice, and they're hanging in the Smithsonian for viewing. Now, what I see this is as the second sign starting to come and be manifested. What you're looking at is two pictures, two different pictures. It's the same picture, but the left is a close-up of what the sign is in the right side. The right side, you can't see it as well, but this is a Hebrew congregation, and it is seen very well in the Smithsonian that these are people of color. This goes back to 1919. Everybody say, thank you, Rabbi 2.
Thank you, Rabbi 2.
So this, when Rabbi 2 got this from a client, he sent it in. And when Rabbi told me about it, I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Because what that is coming to the light. To put this in the Smithsonian, for everyone to view and to see, you have thousands upon thousands of people who go through the Smithsonian and view the artifacts and the things that are held there. To be openly spoken that black people, their beginnings is in the Hebrew. This is right after slavery. When did slavery end? 1865, right? So we're almost, what, 35 plus another 20, 55, 54 years after slavery. We can see a people of African descent, no matter where they're from. We saw one part was Ethiopian. That is Rabbi, now I can't think of his name. It's there, but the print is so small, it's kind of fuzzing out. There's, well, I'll tell you who he is. Fune, Rabbi Fune, who is now the chief rabbi in the United States. They look at him as the chief rabbi in the United States. And he is actually the cousin to Michelle Obama. So he's in and out of the White House, and anything connected to the Hebrews, he's their go-to person. So, and that's speaking of the Talit and different, scroll and different things. But the image of the people is a different congregation. All right, but anyway, I just wanted you to kind of get a little bit of what we're looking at from the very beginning, looking at the second sign beginning to come out. And so we're going to go ahead and kind of dig in and I must explain also that this is going to be the first application or the teaching on this topic. There's too much information for me to get it all into one. There's Exodus and Revelation that I must marry and bring out. But I will give you about 9 verses and kind of open up the dialogue so that the next time I teach, I will then be less on some of the topics. Not topics, I will switch. This time, I'm very short on scriptures. And I'm going to give to you today 10 precepts of world governing of African descendants. And I think when I get into it, you're going to recognize a lot of these things that are today. All right, so let's begin to kind of take a look at what we have in Exodus. You'll recognize it right away. And actually this starts in chapter 3, but I'm kind of going right in on my topic for today. And Moshe answered and said, "And if they do not believe me, nor listen to my voice, and say, Yahweh has not appeared to you," and Yahweh said to him, "What is that in your hand?" And he said, "A rod." And he said, "Throw it on the ground." So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moshe fled from it. And Yahweh said to Moshe, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So that he reached out his hand and caught it, and it became a rod in his hand. So that they believe that Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Yishak, and the Elohim of Yaakov have appeared to you. Now, I want to put that together with Revelation chapter 12, verse 5. And she bore a male child who was to shepherd all nations with a rod of iron. And their child was caught away to Elohim and to his throne. Now you recognize that from Revelation chapter 12. The 144,000 will be already introduced here. Chapter 7 gives you the 144,000 and it names all 12 tribes. Chapter 14 also starts out with verse 1 speaking of the 12 tribes. Not one is missing. So when you hear Yeshua say, "I have not lost one," or "I have not lost any," this is what he's saying. All 12 tribes is accounted for. Now, as I always say, you can take one from each tribe and you have one representation. You have all the 12 tribes. But Yahweh is saying 144,000. Now, let's take a look at what happened in the wilderness and what was going on. Just what was happening there. Once again, and if they do not believe me, I want to switch out Moshe with the real lawgiver. If they don't believe Yeshua, if they don't believe Yahweh, watch this. "Nor listen to my voice." That seemed to be an ongoing issue. And so, to not believe, to not listen to the voice. What voice does he give us to listen to? His Torah. And if we don't believe, watch this. And Yahweh said to him, "What is that in your hand?" He said, "A rod." Throw it on the ground. What does Revelation speak about when Yeshua comes? That he will do what? He will lead all nations, shepherd all nations with a rod of iron. So if you can start formulating that image in your mind, Moshe was only the forerunner. Yeshua will come to lead Israel and then shepherd all nations. Well, what was it? Oh, I'm getting ahead. Let me go on to the next. verse 6, Exodus chapter 4, verse 6 through 9. The other, if I didn't say it, was Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. And Yahweh said to him again, now put your hand in your bosom. And he put his hand in his bosom. And when he took it out, and see, his hand was leprous like snow. And he said, put your hand in your bosom again. So he put his hand in his bosom again, and drew it out of his bosom, and see, it was restored like his other flesh. And it shall be, if they do not believe, there we go back to belief. This is why, when I'm teaching, that one word, faith, and I tell you to let's now put in belief, that gives us a little more concrete, a little more foundation of what he's looking for. And it shall be, if he do not believe, if they do not believe, nor listen to the voice of the first sign, they shall believe the voice of the latter sign. And it shall be, if they do not believe even these two signs, or listen to your voice, that you shall take water from the river and pour it on dry land. And the water which you take from the river shall become blood on dry land. So, looking at the rod that is thrown to the earth, and I've already said that, or I didn't, but who also will be thrown to the earth? Hasatan, according to Revelation, right? In that day, Michael shall stand and fight against Hasatan and his messengers. He shall be thrown to the earth. At that point, he will never be able to go back and forth. Remember in Job, he says, where are you going? To and fro the earth, seeking whom I may devour, right? So we know he hasn't been thrown to the earth as permanent yet. But there is a millennial reign where he is absent from the nations. So we haven't got to that point yet. But he shall be thrown to the earth. And remember, what did Yahweh say? What is in your hand? A rod. Throw it to the ground. So Moshe, as the lawgiver, was only a forerunner for Yeshua, who is the real lawgiver. Who should we believe? We should believe him, his word. And so this comes with the Sabbath. This comes with, we have not entered into the new covenant yet. That's when Israel comes out to meet him and enter into a new covenant where the law or the Torah will be placed on hearts of flesh rather than hearts of stone. So, see, it was restored like his other flesh. So, if the first sign, they didn't believe, didn't listen to his voice, and he threw down the rod, even Moshe fled from the serpent. What did they do in the wilderness? Now, this is him being spoken to at the burning bush. He hasn't gotten to them yet. So this is a couple of years prior to him getting them out. So imagine what they were going through as Moshe got there and told them what Yahweh said. They were in very much anguish because they agreed. He went to Israel first, not to Pharaoh. He went to Israel. And they gathered all the elders and all of the people. And Aaron and Moshe sat and spoke with them and told them of what Yahweh said. Moshe knew, because Yahweh said, he's not going to let him go because I'm going to harden his heart. Okay? So have all of that in mind, because I'm not going to go through that here today. I got a whole lot more I need to get to. So Exodus chapter 4 should be kind of running through your mind, and I'm just kind of connecting some of the parts for you right up front. So when I come back together with Exodus, I'm going to bring Exodus a little more into focus. But for today, I just wanted to kind of make those connections for you, that the real lawgiver is Yahweh, Yeshua. And the rod was the first, or is the first sign. What does the rod represent? The rod represents authority and instructions. Right? So Yahweh gave Moshe authority and instructions to rule and reign over his people. And so that's the first sign. But did we believe? The question can be today, do they believe in the laws of Moshe? We know the answer. Do they listen to the voice of Moshe? We know the answer. And so these are the first 9, and I'm going to kind of travel and take a look at some of the things that we've seen today. These are 2 different pictures or images. The one on the right I know is China, 2013. The other one I'm not exactly sure because I'm kind of United States or another river of China. They have been trying to denounce the different signs. But these are different times, different places of the earth. United States, Europe, different nations have been seeing this, what we are seeing. And remember, the first sign was to turn the water into what? Blood. So I just wanted to make sure that you're drawing those connections and seeing that Yahweh is giving us signs, and he's saying to us, go back to Exodus, go back to my Torah, and remember, because it is time for us now to wake up. So, what I'm going to start opening up to you and looking at is the events of today that started long ago. How did we get to where we are today, where we are being tortured, hung in trees this very day, just a week ago? 2 people hung. And so, let me see if I can get this off. All right, so if we can, okay, I think I see what the issue is. The vibrations are causing it to jump. Imperialism. I want to just kind of bring into your consciousness, and I'll explain it as we go. Imperialism. What is imperialism? European nations attempt and success in colonizing as many areas in Africa and Asia as possible for sole benefit of their home nation. The seizure of countries or territories by a stronger country, thank you. In the case of Africa, the European nations dominate all aspects of the weaker countries, including politics, economics, and the social lives of the people. I know that you're familiar with the word imperialism or empire. The word empire should denote, imperial is the root rather. It should denote something and some culture who is proclaiming an imperial or empire or imperialism. So as we continue, we'll see how this is coming together. Here I want to introduce also something of which I spoke of some time back with the African diaspora, and I would say this is an addition to the African diaspora, but looking at the Catholic Pope or the Catholic Church, the Pope who reigned over Catholicism or the Catholic Church at that time, was proposed to by one of the aristocrats of Portugal, slavery. Up until this point, for 700 years prior to this, just over 700 years prior to this date, the Muslims were enslaving Africans and selling them around the world. And at this point, 1441, slavery, let me just begin from the top there. The European slave trade began in 1441. Portugal kind of led the way. Usually stayed in Portugal and worked as laborers, and this is what the slaves would do. Then they began colonizing and using enslaved Africans to do all the hard work. The rest of Europe will follow Portugal's example. In the late 1400s, Europeans arrived in America and brought Africans over to work the land. Excuse me. So what we're looking at here is the Christian church sanctioned slavery once they began to show them the usefulness of strong black men. Once they went in and began to bring them out. Matter of fact, this trip in 1441, they brought back 12 Africans and enslaved them and gave 2 as a gift to the Pope, and he signed contract that they were now at this point cutting out the middlemen, which was the Muslims, and going direct to get slaves. What they were doing was purchasing them prior to this point from the Muslims. And I can trail that all the way back to 711 AD. And notice, 100 years prior was the birth, well, let me give you the date, which was 571 AD. Muhammad was born, and it was closer to 600. I noted that he was around 30 years old when he went into seclusion, came out with his whole way of life. What he did was now took Christianity, parts that he liked, and came up with his own theology. And now, 711, they went to war with anyone who did not convert to Islam. 1492, which is another major time period, they were all kicked out of Spain. This is the exodus from Spain of Islam and the Hebrews. And of course, where did they go? Into Africa, and kept making their music there. So, Israel rejects Yahweh's laws and now are living according to the laws of man. So I'm going to introduce to you today something that I found while looking at, there's a professor, Dr. Umar Johnson, who went to the Museum of the Black Museum of Holocaust, or the Black Holocaust. And as they were touring, he did take images, and I saw on the wall this document that I had to go out and find. And so this is my findings. Once I stopped frame and began to read what was on this, these are 10 concepts or precepts that became laws. And I think as you see them, you will recognize what we're going through today, what our parents went through yesterday, and I think it will help with what we're feeling. Are we supposed to get angry? No. What are we supposed to do?
Pray.
Return to Yahweh's ways.
Hallelujah.
Return to his laws. Because we're going to go by either man's law or Yahweh's law. Isn't that what Yahweh said to Shaul? He said, look, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. So here's the result of rejecting Yahweh's laws, is that we have to live by the laws of man. So this image here, what I wanted to show you is the effect of the European expansion. Countries that have been under European control, the purple, any place in purple is Europe. What they basically call Europe. And any green, colonized and controlled by Europe. Not this part, not this part. But if you can see, here's United States, here's Africa, and South America, Canada. Here's Europe. All right, so that kind of tells you. Partial Europe control or influence. This softer green here and here and here. Then European sphere of influence, once again, here and here. Here is the place that has never been colonized by Europe. Here and here. It don't really leave a whole lot left. So it gives you a very good eye view or image of European influence. Let me say it how Yahweh says it. And the fourth kingdom, which is different from them all. This is what we're looking at. The fourth kingdom. Remember, the fourth kingdom was Rome. Then after Rome, let me tell you what I'm pulling from. I'm sorry, I connect them in my head. Daniel. I'm talking about the statue. And so with Daniel and the statue, you have Babylon as the head, you have the arms, the thighs, and then the legs, which was the fourth kingdom. And that was Rome, which was the legs of iron. But the thing about the fourth kingdom, it extended to the feet. You have how many toes? 10 toes, right? And they was marked with clay. So you have iron and clay. But then there's a rock that is hewn out of the mountain and topples the statue. So this is what we're seeing. We're on the other end. We are seeing the effects of the fourth and fifth kingdom. Now the sixth kingdom, which you can kind of guess, will be the kingdom of Yahweh. But in the meantime, the fourth kingdom, he says, Rome, is different. Teeth of iron. So here's an image of their sphere of control. Here, now kind of dwindling down to more specific control. Here is Africa, two different images, and here is a better look at who kind of owns what. Here's France, Britain, the pink, Portugal, the different colors of blue, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Italy, and that which is independent. There's only two nations here and here. This one is Ethiopia. The other one, I can't remember. Liberia? But it is one of the smaller countries. These two are the only two countries that were never colonized. And the reason Ethiopia was never colonized, because they were able to fight the oppressors off and run them off of their land. Imagine if the other countries had united. And see, this is 53 different countries. And what they did is they had a meeting. Now, I'm going to 1880. They had a meeting in Germany. And from that meeting, the Christian nations came together. They came together and divvied up the whole continent. So you know, we're going back to 1492, 1500, and so on. Well, that didn't end until 1960, supposedly, when they began to decolonize. But look what they did when they agreed to come out. They charged independence tax, to where most of them are still paying these tax. Now, I was born 1960. So that's less than 60 years back. And look what is in Africa. Look and see why they came and seized the whole continent. You got petroleum, natural gas, crude oil, gold, coffee, grain, tea, diamonds, gold, crude oil, the iron, cotton. The land is rich. This is the wealthiest land or continent in the entire world. And the European nation said, we want it. So they went in and took, for just over 400 years, these are two different maps, the same continent, but this one is only an image of the wealth that is in the ground that the European nation says, we want it and we want our share. What happened in World War II? World War II, as an example of greed. Hitler said, I want more and I want to control everyone else. So he began to fight even against his own European nations and began what he called supreme beings, or Nazis. And as he rose to power and began to knock off some of the other countries, World War II, which was from 1938 through 1945, here is what was the prize, and greed was the drive. So let's start now beginning to look at the governance of African descendants, or people so-called African slaves. The 10 Precepts of American Slavery Jurisprudence. This is by A. Leon Higginbotham, Jr. This I pulled from Dayton, Ohio Law School, and this is the website that I went to. There's 10 categories that they came up with as a World Council in governing blacks. The first one is inferiority. Presume and preserve, protect, and defend the idea of the superiority of whites and the inferiority of blacks. Number 2, property. Define the slave as the master's property, maximize the master's economic interest, disregard the humanity of the slave except when it serves the master's interest, and deny slaves the fruit of their labor. As Torah students, you should start recognizing, you shall not eat the fruit of your ground. Civil War, once again, this was The Civil War was from 1861 through 1865. And a man by the name of Abraham, who now fought this war to free the slaves. Now, I've read, and I'll just kind of throw this in here, I've read during my research, especially when I was really looking for information for the African diaspora, as I go around and kind of open this up to different congregations, I found that there's a story of him having these dreams, and that Yahweh told him that he needed to free the slaves. And so he ran on a ticket that they had to keep him quiet about, which was emancipation. And they advised him, you know, there are people, you know, all around. They said he ran in 1860. They said, I'm afraid if you run on that ticket and make it too public and really push it, that we won't get the help that we need. So he kept quiet a little more, but once he was elected, 1861, he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But it took, on 1863, it took a couple of more years as the war was being still fought for it to be adopted and approved. Excuse me, let me go back. Okay. Okay. Number three. Number three. Keep blacks, whether slave or free, as powerless as possible, so that they will be submissive and dependent in every respect, not only to the master, but to whites in general. Limit blacks' accessibility to the courts and subject blacks to an inferior system of justice with lesser rights and protection and greater punishment for the whites than for whites. And down here we say utilize force as necessary. So these on the side are some of my points I just wanted to make sure that I brought in so that you understand. So they do what is called court-appointed attorneys. These are just examples for, this is not all, there's a lot. But I'm keeping it very short, so I'm just kind of wetting your palate with some suggestions of some of the implementations that we don't even recognize. So, let's continue. Number 4, racial purity. Always preserve white male sexual dominance, draw an arbitrary racial line, and preserve white racial purity as thus defined. Tolerate sexual relations between white men and black women. Punish severely sexual relations between white women and non-white men. With respect to children children who are products of interracial sexual relations, the freedom or enslavement of the black child is determined by the status of the mother. If your mother's a slave, guess what? You're a slave. The grandfather clause is forever. See, these are the precepts. The laws came in behind them, and one such that you would know of is, and I've taught on it some time back, black codes or Jim Crow. Jim Crow is still around. It's just a new version now. Michelle Alexander is very good. Her book called The New Jim Crow. Number 5, manumission for blacks. This is the act or process of manumitting, especially formal emancipation from slavery. An example before I get into it, which is, let's say a slave served his master well, he's now aged, and the master desires to set him free. That is manumitting. He's setting documents to say that he is free, because if the slave is found, he has to produce formal documentation that he is free and not a slave. In other words, he had to have a green card. Limit and discourage manumission in order to minimize the number of free blacks in the state or world. Confine free blacks to a status as close as possible to slavery. This is traced back, I saw as I was doing my research, to before Yeshua, 2 BC. The Romans used this. So they will keep you, once you have been enslaved, they will keep you in a status as close to slavery, but you're just free. But you are a lower class citizen. We can see this where Shaul, remember he had to say, I too am a Roman citizen. Remember he had to prove his status? Let's take a look at this really quick. We should recognize this from our era, that the master would come in and rape his property. Whether she was married or not didn't matter to him. She was his property. He was his property. And they can take your children and sell them off for profit. It didn't matter. Whatever he decided to do, you are his property. So they were preserving what is called racial purity, or their status as supreme beings in the world. Let's take a look at family. Recognize no right of the black family. Destroy the unity of the black family. Deny slaves the right of marriage. Demean and degrade black women, black men, black parents, and black children. And then condemn them for their conduct and state of mind. Let's look at this. Still in operation today. Now, I just slowed down here because I don't want to fly by all of them, and I did say I will come back and revisit them, but I just won't have as much information. But when they see a black man, what do they call him? The angry black man. Or they see the black woman, she's an angry black woman. Because we reject your treatment of us, we're angry. And do we have a right to be angry? Is there anything that caused the anger that we have? So if you see me as an angry black man, then you should ask, what can we do to help? What can we do to alleviate the anger? That's if you want to be my brother's keeper. Let's go, and this is one of the places I really wanted to hurry and get to, education and culture. Deny blacks any education, deny them knowledge of their culture, and make it a crime to teach those who are slaves how to read or write. It was a crime to teach a black man to read. Now we can go back to Frederick Douglass, who had to trick children into helping him learn to read. Oh, you can't read. You don't know what that letter means. Oh, yes, I do. And so these were the type things as he was working that he would use tactics to get them to speak letters and then pronounce words. And as a brilliant man he was, began to use that to learn to read and write, and became a congressman. So, can we say that this is still alive today? Well, let's look at the ABCs of education. XYZ school have bad grades. This school have bad grades. That school have bad grades. But if you get to the right side of town, they have good grades. And I think this speaks to a concept that is well into the fabric of most countries, denying blacks any education. Now that we have the right to go to school, learn, to vote, and all of these things, but look from where we come. And look at the concept that was back during slavery. But is it still around? I say yes. Here is a little bit of proof that I will give. The governor of North Carolina, which is ICOT, in 1901 through 1905, he was the governor, and he was known as the educational governor because he built, if I remember correctly, when I taught on him before, 699 schools he built. In other words, he was the governor, he sanctioned monies and funds, he directed them towards education, school buildings. Out of that 699, again, I'm struggling for remembering exact numbers, but I know it was close to 60 schools that was built for blacks. So we still see some of the HBIs or the HBCs. Thank you for the correction. I knew I messed up. But there are schools that are built, that were built, and we still see today. So, but as a result, here's a speech that he gave, that what he wanted, this is a ticket that he was running on in 1912. Excuse me. He was going for the U.S. Senate, and he said, I am going for universal education. So not only in North Carolina, he's now going for the United States, period. After he had talked for only a few minutes, ICOC spoke these words. This is his quote. I have always talked about education. He threw up his hands, and he died. At that point, this is true. From that point, he was no more, and he drew his last breath. But this was in Alabama. He was a Democrat, and he ran as a white supremacist. They were able to run in the open and declare what they were, because he knew that he would get a lot of votes. So, I don't know. Was it Yahweh who cut him off from going nationwide? I don't know. But we know that this is still a part of today's fabric of the United States and around the world, that blacks get a lesser education. We can go back to Brown and Board of Education, different places, Civil Rights era, where Ruby Bridges, thank you. Ruby Bridges, the Arkansas 9, the different names of events that we know were staples or foundational cases where we had Thurgood Marshall who fought against this kind of stuff. But still today, all they did is went underground with it. And this governor, he said in one of his earlier speeches, he said, the white man never have to worry about his place in the world. That the black man will never be able to catch us. He said, they will never be able to compete with whites, economically or otherwise. So my question is, what did he set up in the educational system that still stands to this very day, that we can go into any school and individually prove ourselves capable, but our schools still come out with the lowest grades? Is there a system that is maybe by JB 101, maybe by our zip codes, which the banking is good for that, red lines? Put them all here. And when we see that zip code, we have a different grading system for them. I don't know. I don't know what he put together. But he was very confident in whatever he did that the black man would never catch him in the world of economics. These was his words. Number 8. Oh, here's another good one. Religion. Obey your master. Recognize no right of slaves to define and practice their own religion, to choose their own religious leader, or to worship with other blacks. Encourage them to adopt the religion of the white master and teach them that God is white and will regard the slave who obeys, reward the slave who obeys the commands of his master here on earth. Use religion to justify the slave's status on earth. Let's go back to the pontiff, the Pope, the Catholic Church. Why do you think they're pushing for a universal church? Obey your master on earth. And this Pope has already declared that Jesus is not coming back. We have waited for 2,000 years and we shall wait no longer. And so, follow the Catholic Church. And so this is their desire now to create one universal church. And we have many groups that have decrees that says we believe in the one universal Catholic Church, or universal, the church universal. And so, if you see, it says recognize no rights. It's not that you won't, strive to get rights, but recognize no rights. That is still today, because the Catholic Church doesn't recognize any other church leadership besides its own. All others are under the Catholic Church in their view. Recognize the rights of the slave to define and practice their own religion, choose their own religious leaders, or to worship with other blacks. Encourage them to adopt the religion of the white master. What did they do? They broke one of the commandments, the third one, or the second one. no images. No images. You shall make no graven images. So what did they do? They created pictures that all the churches put on their wall. Blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jesus. Slaves, obey your master. There's much more. I just wanted to kind of wet your palate. Here's another, these last two. Poverty or property, make sure. Liberty, okay, I'm kind of guessing. Liberty or resistance. Limit blacks' opportunity to resist, bear arms, rebel or flee, curtail their freedom of movement, freedom of association, and freedom of expression, deny blacks the right to vote and to participate in government. So I want to point back to the Voting Rights of 1965, which sought to end discriminatory practices, or Jim Crow. That's what the the black codes was all about, denying the right to vote. After slavery, they had to figure out, what are we going to do with these 4 million blacks that are now going to be set free in this country at once? What can we do? So immediately they came up with hoods. Excuse me. Not neighborhood. White hoods. KKK. That was one of their first police. Later on, they came up with another concept to take off the hoods and put on blue uniforms with a little Star of David badge. But right here, they say limit blacks' opportunities to resist, bear arms, to rebel, or to flee. Curtail their freedom of movement. Let's go back to MOVE. Project MOVE. 1985. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Drew a blank. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They blew up a whole square block of Project MOVE, or people who had pretty much centered themselves as a community and said, we will no longer educate our children in your systems. We will do homeschooling. And so they began, the FBI, not Roosevelt, the guy who was the leader of, what was his name? He was over the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover, thank you. Hoover was very instrumental, as well as setting them up. They would get all kind of information to destroy them. They stopped doing sanitation, which means they began to have a lot of trash. So they said that they were living in squalor, they were creating rats and disease, and so even their neighbors began to complain because of what the United States government was doing to them to make them look bad. And what they were doing was, they were saying they was being freed from the oppression of having to live under the oppression of what they were receiving. And the story goes on, many, and we can go back even further than that. Rabbi 2 was 5 years old at that point. So Laura was just about to be born. Many of you was here. We may not have heard of this type of atrocity, but it was during our lifetime, which is why I bring it up. It was during our lifetime, for those who were born by 1985. It started before that. It actually started in, I went back as far as 1972. I was 12 years old. I had no clue what was going on, but they were fighting. And they wasn't alone. That there were plenty of European descendants that fought alongside them. But over the years, they began to dwindle down because the fight was being taken to them. They had a major battle in 77, and then in 1985, they brought in the airplanes and once again, just blew them up. Women, children, men. This is what happened in this country. Now, I can go back even further. Let me go back to, when was the first flight? 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Well, by 1921, they used the airplanes, of which it's a new toy for them, to bomb Tucson, is it Arizona?
Yeah, Arizona.
Tucson, Arizona. They blew up a whole community that was known as the wealthiest black community in the world, or in the United States. Let me stay there. But yes, really in the world. Because there were millionaires during that time. 1921. They were millionaires, so blacks was leaving, going to that area because they knew they can get jobs there. They had buildings. Tucson.
It was
Oklahoma. Tucson, Oklahoma. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Tacoma.
It is Tulsa. It is Tulsa. I remember that part. Oklahoma. Yes, thank you. So there's more, but I'm going to leave it there because I have just a few more slides that I want to get to. But I will revisit these not as in depth as I'm going through it this time, because I really wanted you to get these precepts. So I gave you a little bit of the scriptures to kind of open up dialogue and thought, let you know I'm not just giving you some stuff I dug up. But these are things that you see still valid and working today. Okay, here's another example. Two men, one black, one white. If a white man strap on a gun, AK, 15? 47, AK-47, and walk down the street, they will stop and ask him a question. But as a black man, they bring in the dogs, they bring in the cars, and they put you on your back, put the handcuffs on you, while they got their guns aimed at you. Now this is an example that I've seen. But we as black people do not have the freedom to open carry. The laws are there for us to do, because we are citizens of this country. But remember, it says, limit opportunities to resist, bear arms, rebel, or flee. So even to this day, we're still under that concept. Or the Jim Crow laws still exist. And my last one, or the last concept, by any means possible, support all measures, including the use of violence, which maximize the profitability of slavery and which legitimizes racism. Oppose by the use of violence if necessary all measures which advocate freedom or rebelliousness, or the fight for freedom of expression or any other right in this country. By any means necessary. Is this still in use today? I would say yes. We can see it happening and being recorded on cell phones, uploaded to YouTubes. Somebody put out a statistic that said, oh, these were the people over in Africa. They said a black person in the United States is killed by police every 28 days? A black person is killed every 28 days. And using the statistics of how many was killed, and I'm thinking they either used last year's stats or what have started already this year. We're in July, and they have just under 200 blacks that they've already killed. They've killed, I can't remember the total, I had it in my head a few weeks back. They gave a total for 2015, and struggling trying to even remember. But it was a big number. And I'm talking about police killing unarmed blacks. I'm not talking about how many people they killed. But we see that racism have a big hand, and by any means necessary, they are maintaining supremacy. Now, is this racist to speak of? I don't think it's racist to bring up the point that we are crying out for justice, but justice seemed to flee from us in this country. So much so that other countries are now lifting their voices because of social media that is recording these events. Not that it just started. We've always dealt with this. I know from personal experience. Beat up and even robbed from policemen. I know from personal experience that this happens. Did I do anything to deserve it? Well, I was spreading the gospel of what I thought was the gospel at that time. Well, I won't go there, but I'm just saying that this is still in effect. So as we continue to move through, I have a couple of more, 3 more after this one, so I want to move on. I want to look at really quickly a couple of slides on what have we had to deal with in this country, another phase of it. Here's an article that appears in the Washington Times, May 5th, 2014. So this was only a couple of years back. Margaret Sanger, who is a well-known racist, eugenicist extraordinaire. This person here did a write-up on her, and I've only taken just a couple of excerpts to kind of give you my point here. Sanger shaped the eugenics movement in America and beyond in the 1930s and 1940s. Her views and those of her peers in the movement contributed to the compulsory sterilization laws in the 1930s in the U.S., United States, that resulted in more than 60,000 sterilizations of vulnerable, here's a code word, vulnerable people, including people she considered, here's another 3 code words, feeble-minded, idiots, and morons. These are part of the black codes. We were also identified as feeble-minded, idiots, and morons. In other words, we were vulnerable. When they had to kind of go underground and not be so outwardly with their racism and kind of use codes, the codes were more acceptable. Here's the same thing, still a couple of excerpts from that article. 79% of Planned Parenthood, let me clarify. It is now called Planned Parenthood. Eugenics have kind of went underground. Eugenics, and I think I have an explanation in here, so I'll move on unless I don't have it there. But anyway, 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortions facilities are located within walking distance of Black or Hispanic communities. Suspect. The CDC and Prevention Abortion Surveillances report revealed that between 2007 2010, nearly 36% of all abortions in the United States were performed on Black children, even though Black Americans make up only 13% of our population. A further 21% of abortions were performed on Hispanics and 7% more on other minority groups, for a total of 64% of the United States abortion tragically performed on minority groups. Now, I didn't get back to the syphilis and all the other things that they put into our communities. What are those, the airmen? Anybody? Tuskegee Airmen. We have a lot of examples of what by the government did to attack the Black culture in this country and around the world. And you did notice this is today's time, 2007 to 2010. So these are things, and let me just go back. Right here in Winston-Salem, they had a major sterilization going on in this city, where the lawsuit just was handed over, where they now have to pay monetary retribution to the women and men who went through this. And just thank Yahweh that my own mother in 1960 didn't have to go through it. But they were getting women of her caliber or community and sterilizing them without them knowing it, and forced on, and even their children, and saying that if they were on welfare or whatever, they would say that we would cut you off if you do not agree to this. My mother was a young lady at that time. She was 20 years old when I was born. So she was in that age group. They were getting them from as young as, it said, 8. They were getting girls, our community, Black girls. They were going to the schools. They would, see, these systems are watchdogs. So they would select, they would know who they need to go to and about their family. Because you got to give them your whole family history. When you go to school, they know everything. So they would get the girls who fit certain categories, and they would say, yeah, let's cut them off from having children. Let's cut them off. Sounds familiar? Remember when going back to Egypt, let us cut them off, for they shall grow in number and fight against us, right? So it's still happening today, that we have been targeted. It's just a different way. Let's take another look. Now that was eugenics, then which merged into later, which is now called Planned Parenthood. Thank you. Let's kind of look and see where was the root of it. Darwinism. If you have ever studied Darwinism or heard of it, here is kind of the father of it who coined it. Not Darwinism, but eugenics. Sir Francis Galton, he was born on February 16th, 1822, and he died January 17th, 1911. Here's the two things that I wanted to really point out. But he's known, these are his accolades. And I put them here. So you can see, when a person who is educated, they get to be well known, and look at all his accolades, and they kind of, everybody say then, they must be right, So look how educated he is, and let's follow him. But anyway, eugenicist, and he studied proto-eugenics or genetics. So he was a geneticist. So he understood DNA. So do you think they targeted the DNA today? Why is it that we as a people suffer from different ailments that are mainly to black people, like sickle cell, diabetes, hypertension, certain things that the majority of blacks get. And one lady who is European, she said, I question why that is the case here in the United States and not the case in Africa. She said, after studying so many cases, and she was a doctor, why isn't it that way in Africa? She said, they have rare cases of hypertension, diabetes, and all of these things that we suffer here. Here's the results. So a little bit further into Sir Francis Galton. In 1883, he coined the term eugenicists, or eugenics, later describing it as the study of the agencies under social control that may improve or repair the racial qualities of future generations, either physically or mentally. So they repaired our parents for us today. So that we're here today with all of these ailments that we're going to the doctors for, trying to figure out why am I, suffering with all of these diseases, all of these different things that they say are prevalent among African Americans. Let me tell you who he was. Cousin of Douglas Stralt Galton, Galton, and half-cousin of Charles Darwin. And both families boasted fellows of the Royal Society. So they were aristocrats. And so they're going to listen to people with money. Here's another look at the medical community. One more slide after this. The Negro has been domesticated. But the question is, will he ever become an integral part of Anglo-American society, civilization? Why do men of